Hey, what's up? It's Mr. Dean, and it's time to continue our 3D Mario retrospective series with Super Mario Galaxy. This is actually my third time now making a video on this game, but the other two videos kind of suck, so let's try at this again.
Do you see this right here? This is not only my ticket to one day making hundreds of dollars on eBay.
Shut the f up, you loser. Alright, so let's go back in time to the Nintendo 64 era with Super Mario 64. This was the first Mario game to enter into the true 3D platforming stratosphere, and it was a massive leap for the franchise. Where the typical 2D Mario game featured a large assortment of levels that each acted as a linear platforming course, 64 featured a limited amount of levels that opened the ability for problem solving and exploration for the player. Instead of each level having one objective, each one had multiple in order to optimize the Nintendo 64's abilities at the time, since making more levels wouldn't have been practical. The game also had to figure out how Mario would be controlled, since previously the player only had to control the X and Y axis. Now all of a sudden, when entering into the third dimension, the Z axis would be introduced, which up to this point in time this hadn't really been navigated within game design. Well, at least it never really had been designed as well as Super Mario 64 was. Don't get me wrong, it was far from a perfect game. The controls could get wonky at times and the camera loved to be annoying, but all in all, it was absolutely terrific. It's easy to make fun of this game now in 2024 with the context of how far modern gaming has come. But placing yourself in the mid-90s when this game came out, it was a mind-blowing experience and one that would greatly influence where 3D games would go moving forward. A few years later on the GameCube, the 3D Mario series would continue with Super Mario Sunshine. Nintendo opted to get creative with the story and premise, as both the level designs and plot were unlike anything the Mario series had seen up to this point. The game introduced new series staples of characters and enemies such as Petey Piranha, the Piantas, the Nokis, Shadow Mario, and more. Here, instead of the mission simply just being to rescue Peach, we are also doing community service, clearing up all of the goop on Isle Delfino after being falsely arrested, which was such a bizarre yet adorable idea. And all of the levels being designed around a sunshine theme meant the developers got creative in order to make sure each of the levels were distinguishable from one another. Honestly, I still think that it's incredible how none of these levels get monotonous, because it would have been so easy for that to happen. The way the levels were laid out was still similar to Super Mario 64 though. Instead of it being a ton of levels with one linear mission in each, it was completely built around fewer and more expansive levels. This was even more the case with Sunshine, with there only being 7 full levels with more shines in each one than there was in 64. So this would of course beg the question, where should the 3D Mario series go after this? These first two games were not perfect, but they still were both charming and great in their own ways. Well, at Space World 2000, a tech demo called Super Mario 128 would be showcased. This showed off, and you will not believe this, 128 Marios running around. This demo was made with the GameCube's technology, however some of the tech from it would later be incorporated into other games. The effects of it could be seen in the first Pikmin with rapid object generation, some of the physics from the demo would be featured in Metroid Prime, and the sphere walking technology would be seen in The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, and of course Super Mario Galaxy. It was often discussed with the development team from the first two games how they needed some kind of new controlling method with how cumbersome the camera system could get. One idea was to have spherical objects, as that way if the player kept running in one direction, they would end back up in the same place that they started. In hindsight, honestly, this was such a tall order to go from the wonky camera system of Sunshine to something as ambitious as this, but spoiler alert, they kind of nailed it. And with the idea to have platforming built around spherical objects, it naturally made sense to have the game set in space, as that way it would thematically make sense with the setting. It seemed that the biggest goal during development was making a game that anyone could pick up and easily understand. Although the first two games were great, they had a learning curve for people who had never played a 3D platformer. While by this point 3D platformers were becoming more familiar for players, the Mario series had yet to truly master the sense of control. So this time around they wanted to keep control inputs to a minimum in order to make it simple to understand and as seamless as possible. And they would also be making this for the Wii, which means everyone's favorite, motion controls. And also in an attempt to appeal to casual gamers, they wanted to incorporate a multiplayer mode for the first time to really hone in on that principle. Now in reality, all that mode would be the second player pointing at the screen and collecting star bits, whoop-de-do, but it is still better than nothing, I suppose. Really, the most important thing to understand about this game's development is that they wanted anyone to be able to pick up a Wii remote and quickly understand the premise of controlling this game. They didn't want it to be disorienting or frustrating, just simple Mario fun. So I guess it's time to talk about the game itself and see how successful they were in that mission. Now Sunshine had previously thrown a wrench into what the story could be for a Mario game. Sure, that game's story wasn't deep or anything, but it was more than just the simple Peach gets kidnapped plotline. I'm not saying that a Mario game needs to have a good story, by the way, that is not at all what makes the series so good. However, creativity with the story can go a long way, especially for a 3D game. Honestly, story-wise, this may be my favorite game in the entire franchise. And for the most part, that is less because of the story itself and more because of the way the game portrays its story. Basically, every century a comet soars above the Mushroom Kingdom, so a Star Festival is held every time. Mario gets invited by Peach to attend the Star Festival, and lo and behold, Bowser attacks it and kidnaps Peach. However, with that being said, this game is so dramatic and cinematic. The cutscenes that this game opens with are genuinely unreal, especially for a Mario game. Not to roast Sunshine, but everything that happened in that game plot-wise would make me laugh and not take it seriously. Whether it be Bowser Jr. thinking Peach was his mama, or the hilariously bad voice acting, that game was begging to be taken unseriously. However, with Galaxy, everything feels imminent and important. It takes the same Mario plot as always and turns up the intensity to make it feel brand new. I mean, Bowser literally uproots Peach's entire castle with these ships, which just makes it even more badass than anything that had ever happened before. And when Kamek knocks Mario off the plot of land after Peach's castle gets stolen, there is actually a sense of defeat with the player even though they had no control over what happened. You want to defeat Bowser in this game not just because the game is fun to play, but because it makes you care. Once Mario wakes back up, he is on this tiny spherical planet where he has to catch 3 bunnies that are really just Lumas. This is the perfect way to let the player get acclimated to controlling themselves on the spherical planets. Although I think it's actually designed really well, it is very different than anything thus far in the series, so having a calm setting with no time limit or threat is the perfect way to introduce the player. Once we do catch them, we meet Rosalina, who gives us the ability to do the spin jump, which is the brand new move. We have a small platforming course, and then we are transported to this game's hub area, the Comet Observatory. This is where we learn even more about the plot in this game because what I said before was only half the story. So Rosalina tells us that Bowser stole the power stars from the Comet Observatory, which is the primary energy source allowing for transportation. Bowser is also planning on making his own galaxy, so we feel inclined to stop him from bringing that evil idea to fruition. With that being said, I feel like this game does something that really only Super Mario Odyssey also does, that being creating a mutualistic partnership. In this game, Rosalina is helping us by allowing Mario to use the Comet Observatory to go to the levels in the game and get power stars, thus allowing him to eventually rescue Peach and stop Bowser. In return, Mario is giving Rosalina power stars to allow her to go back to watching over the galaxies. There's nothing wrong with the games that don't have this aspect, but I personally love the aspect of having Mario have a partnership with someone where they both are benefiting from it. In Super Mario Odyssey, a similar concept is done with Cappy helping Mario to rescue Tiara, which more on that whenever I actually make a video on Odyssey. Something else that this game does that's incredible is Rosalina's storybook. As you collect stars in this game, more and more chapters are unlocked where you can listen to Rosalina's storybook, which chronicles her journey to watching over the universe. It never is really stated that that is what the story is about, however it's strongly inferred by the player. This is something that they just did not need to include in this game at all, but it adds such an emotional element to everything. This serves as a great reminder that Mario and Peach are not the only ones who matter and are relevant to everything going on. We have lovely art to go along with this to really sell the children's book aesthetic too. You slowly unlock these chapters as you play through the game and collect stars, and it is unironically one of my favorite parts of the whole game. I won't go over the entire story here since I think that the game itself presents it better than I could and it should be experienced through that. However, I just wanted to throw this into the video since it really showed them going the extra mile. Apparently too, Yoshiaki Koizuma, who is the director of Super Mario Galaxy, wrote Rosalina's storybook without anyone else on the team knowing. Then he presented it to Miyamoto, and now here we are. This is one of those features where if it didn't exist in the game, I wouldn't think anything of it, but with it being here, I could not imagine the game without having it. Alright, so one of the biggest things that sets Mario Galaxy apart from the previous entries in the series, aside from the format of the game itself, is the way it controls. I think overall 64 and Sunshine had a much more loose control scheme that allowed for more creativity and experimentation with the player, however it felt difficult to grasp for new players. While it wasn't hard to get the hang of, say, controlling Super Mario 64, it certainly felt a little bit more finicky. Now fast forward to Galaxy and the controls are as polished as they have ever been. However, this is a double-edged sword. While running around and jumping feels smoother than it ever has before, there is a kind of charm that 64 and Sunshine had with its bullshitness. I think overall Galaxy is a much better controlling experience, but they are good in their own ways. That is only half the story for Galaxy's controls though. For the times in the game that you are running around on a flat surface, it is pretty straightforward and everything. However, I mentioned how one of the goals of the game was having Mario run around on spherical objects, which is a much more ambitious development task. Sometimes in Galaxy it would be a planet that is entirely spherical, or sometimes it might take on a more odd shape like a peanut or a disc. Either way, this is a much more complex problem for controlling Mario than just running around in, say, the flat terrain of the Honey Hive Galaxy is. So how well did the game accomplish this? Well, for the most part, I think it worked fine. There were times where the spherical nature of the platforming felt off, but it could have been so much worse than it is. Take for instance the Space Junk Galaxy, where on the first star you have to collect 5 star pieces on these tiny planets. There were a few moments where crossing a certain point on one of the planets would reverse my analog stick and cause me to run in the wrong direction. This would never be more than a minor hiccup, and I don't think it has ever come close to affecting my enjoyment of the game though. For how ambitious this game was with its control scheme, I would call this a resounding success. This game being released for the Wii also meant that motion controls were along for the ride, and thankfully they were actually not intrusive on this game. I am recording this on the Super Mario 3D All-Stars version because of convenience, however I am very familiar with the Wii version as well, as I grew up with it. The motion controls on the Wii version are primarily there for two things: spin jumping and collecting star bits. Star bits are the collectibles found throughout the game that are used to unlock new levels, and I love these. You would collect them by pointing your Wii remote at the screen, and I vividly remember it being so satisfying to collect these, and it still is now. Motion controls were also used for spin jumping, which was implemented as both an attack and a mode of platforming. You could spin your Wiimote to attack an enemy, oftentimes this rewarding you with star bits, while jumping straight on an enemy would give you a coin. On the other hand, you could also use spin jumping as a way to give you extra height on a jump or save you if you miscalculate a jump. While I thought judging my depth perception worked really well here, this solved that problem in a rare instance where I completely judged the jump incorrectly. For how bad the motion control implementation was in certain Wii games, I am happy to say that I think that they were done very tastefully here. There are a few exceptions though, because of course there are. Specifically, there are 3 times in the game where the motion controls become extremely annoying. First is the Manta Ray stars, where you control a Manta Ray through a slim water course in a set amount of time. There are 2 of these in the game, with the second one being exponentially more difficult than the first. Now this has been talked to death about online, but it's, how do I say this, the worst thing ever. Because you are controlling a Manta Ray using motion controls on an already very constricting path, it ends up feeling extremely frustrating and uncomfortable. Then there are the bubble missions, where you use the pointer controls to blow wind onto this bubble and bring it to the finish point. This isn't quite as bad, but it just isn't even close to being as fun as the normal platforming in this game. This, similarly to the Manta Ray missions, isn't really that common, and like I said, it isn't nearly as egregious. And then there are the rolling on a ball stars, which are just so bizarre. While I think it's funny that the sign is just yelling the instructions to us, controlling a ball on an uneven surface is just no. With the analog stick, I think this one specifically would have been much more tolerable, since it would be almost like a much more slow-paced version of Super Monkey Ball or something, but with motion controls, it is just way too slow and awkward to be fun. These 3 instances are the exceptions to the rule though. Otherwise, I think that this is by far the best controlling 3D Mario game up to this point in the series. As for the power-ups that we got this time around, well, I mean, they're thought-provoking, that's for sure. First up is B Mario, which allows Mario to hover in the air briefly and stick to honey-filled surfaces. I'm gonna be completely honest, I really dislike this item. Crawling around on the honey hexagon things was fun, but otherwise this item just didn't really click for me. I also don't like how it takes away your ability to do Mario's other moves like long jumping and triple jumps. We had the triumphant return of the Fire Flower, except this time it was on a timer, which I actually kind of liked that change. This was generally used for more puzzle related quests, like say on the Freeze Flame Galaxy, where we would have a set amount of time to light up these torches. Doing so would advance the level or reward you with a star, which personally I approve of the Fire Flower change being timed. Inversely, there is also the Ice Flower, which allows you to skate on water and lava, and that's it. Honestly, some of the times that this one was used, although pretty brief, I thought was pretty clever. Say on the Beach Bowl Galaxy where you would have to guide this Cataquack using the ice left on the water, or on the Freeze Flame Galaxy with the platforming only accessible with this item. And just like with the regular Fire Flower, you are on a timer which keeps you on your toes. Then we have the Boo Mushroom, which is by far the most conflicting one for me. So this one literally turns Mario into a Boo, completely morphing your movement. Now you slowly hover in the air and gain the ability to turn invisible for a very brief period of time, allowing you to go through certain walls. I both loved and hated using this thing, mainly because it has a similar problem to B Mario where it's very slow. However, I think its usage in the game was a little bit more creative and fun. Take for instance your race against a Big Boo towards the end of the game. At one point, a Hungry Illuma Galaxy even allows you to choose between B Mario and Boo Mario to complete a platforming course, with the design lifting pros and cons for each. I ironically enough chose B Mario for this because I thought it would be easier, but I really loved the way it was designed. And by the way, I don't hate B Mario. I think it's a cute idea, it just was my least favorite item in the game personally. Thankfully, there's no other item in the game that could possibly be worse though. Yeah, the Spring Mushroom makes its triumphant debut in the Toy Time Galaxy and I went through a really weird phase of liking this item back in high school, and what was I thinking? This brings the pacing of the platforming to a sluggish pace with how awkward constantly leaping is. I don't even think that there's any meaningful implementation of this item that warrants its existence either. Every time I used it in my playthrough, I rolled my eyes. And then on top of all of these, there was also the Red Star, which was kind of like the Wing Cap from Super Mario 64, except with insanely better controls. The problem is that it was only used once. You use it to get 1 star and that's it. It is still accessible in the Comet Observatory even after completing this one mission, but why even include it? Honestly, this kind of makes it worse that they give us the ability to fly for one mission and then just tease us in the hub area with it. And then finally is the Rainbow Star, which is our invincibility power up, and yeah, it's whatever. It's satisfying ramming through enemies with it and getting star bits. That's really all I have to say about it. Where Super Mario 64 and Super Mario Sunshine didn't really have items at all since it wasn't a linear platforming game, so it didn't really have the same philosophy as the 2D games, Galaxy is a bit of a different story. I think overall the power-ups were welcome additions to the game and helped to spice up the gameplay from time to time. Literally the only one I disliked being in the game was the Spring Mushroom. The Bee Mushroom was at least cute and creative enough to make me not mind using it, and the Red Star was more so just sad than annoying. But yeah, overall items were a resounding good enough, I guess. One of my biggest reservations with 64 and Sunshine was also the swimming, since both games were somehow worse than the other in that regard. And thank Nintendo got their act together with Super Mario Galaxy. It still isn't perfect, but it is so much less slow paced that it is actually bearable now. Super Mario Odyssey is definitely where the 3D Mario series perfected swimming, but up to this point there was a significant improvement. Now let's talk about some of the levels that are found in the game. With my videos on Super Mario 64 and Super Mario Sunshine, shameless plug by the way, I kind of went through every single one of them in detail and talked about every mission. With Galaxy, I'm not going to do that since I think it would get so monotonous so quickly with how linear the missions are. Generally, there are positive and negative thoughts I have as a whole, so let's talk about both sides of the coin. I'll get the negatives out of the way first. Some of the galaxies here are just straight up lazy. There is no bigger example of this than the Gold Leaf Galaxy, which is literally just the Honey Hive Galaxy but flipped around and with a slightly new theme. Yeah, the missions are different, but you just cannot convince me that it is fun and exciting playing on a copied level like this from earlier in the game. The Gold Leaf Galaxy doesn't even really do anything to warrant using the same design and layout as Honey Hive either. It is genuinely probably the most meh level in the entire game. Like, the missions here range from being extremely unmemorable and dull to being unbelievably annoying. An example of this is the one that's built around navigating Cataquacks around in order to launch you around, which I hated these things in Sunshine, and their inclusion in this game is even more obnoxious. The one instance of baiting them with the Ice Flower on Beach Bowl was cool, but whenever we are trapped in a maze with them and it keeps launching Mario around, it starts to lose its appeal pretty quickly. Problem number 2 with the levels is that a vast majority of them are kind of generic. There are genuinely creative levels like Space Junk, Toy Time, Gusty Garden, Freeze Flame, Battle Rock, and Honey Hive, but aside from that, it's a little uninspired. The Beach Bowl Galaxy is just a beach theme level, Ghostly Galaxy is just a haunted level, Seaside Galaxy is just another beach level but now shaped in a ring, holy whoop-de do. Dreadnought Galaxy is a very similar concept to Battle Rock Galaxy. Gold Leaf Galaxy rips off Honey Hive Galaxy. Dusty Dune Galaxy is just a desert. That doesn't make these levels bad, far from it, they just aren't as immediately filled with creativity. I suppose you could argue that Super Mario 64 was similar with its level theming, but with that being the first ever 3D Mario game and the levels being much more built around exploration and critical thinking, I think it was more acceptable there. Because the levels in the game weren't just linear platforming courses, there were more creative ideas sprinkled about with their generic themes. For example, Cool Mountain seems like a generic snow level on the surface, but it has new concepts like a slide where you race against a penguin, and the missions themselves within the level were inventive. In some of these more generic Galaxy levels, there would occasionally be a unique and new mission, but more so it was about the platforming, which, while fun, I do think it loses some of its inspiration. Finally, with the negative thoughts regarding levels, the bosses in this game were actually pretty fun and creative. However, there was one specific case of a boss fight that genuinely frustrates me. That is King Caliente being the final boss fight before the final boss fight taking place in the engine. We already fought Caliente back on the Good Egg Galaxy, so fighting the exact same boss but slightly harder way later in the game is extremely obnoxious. I know the recycled boss problem is way worse and more egregious in Sunshine, but that doesn't make it excusable here. The same thing happens with the Camilla boss fight, which although this one is harder in the Deep Dark Galaxy, it is still the same boss at its heart. Alright, now I know that probably makes it sound like I don't like the levels in this game, but that is far from the truth. Let's go ahead and run through some of the most creative concepts that were shown off in this game. The Space Junk Galaxy is so desolate and honestly kind of sad feeling. All the platforming takes place on debris left from previous rockets and all sorts of rocks, and there is just such a lonely feeling with this one. This particular level, more than anything else in this game, plays with the space theming of Galaxy. Where other levels feel lived in, constructed, and polished, this one completely stands out. The platforming is well designed, but still maintains a randomness quality to it. There's even a part where the platforms fall into place as Mario jumps around, which is new and fun. I also love the inclusion of the sling pods here, launching Mario around. Launching from piece to piece in the level really sells the whole vibe. And finally, the boss fight against the spider is one of the best boss fights in the entire game. This one is actually kind of difficult and kind of scary if you haven't figured out its patterns yet. Its attacks feel potent and terrifying as a new player, which, get this, it's what a boss fight should be. It should be accomplishing and exciting to fight and defeat it. Another one of the more memorable levels is Gusty Garden. I'll talk about the music in a few minutes, but I have to quickly note how amazing the music here is, even making a return to Mario Kart with Cloud Top Cruise. This level takes on a garden theme which hadn't really been done on its own, however this game really plays with this concept. This is everywhere from hanging onto flowers in order to traverse around to fighting a buffed up mole burrowing in the ground. I think that this is one of the first galaxies that people generally point to from this game, and that is for very good reason. Another level like this is Toy Time Galaxy, which, as the name suggests, is filled with references to toys and feels very childlike and playful. The first mission here literally has us taking out this gigantic robot from within, which to this day is exhilarating. Although not explicitly a boss fight, it kind of feels that way. There is also a more traditional boss fight where you use Spring Mario to defeat it, and this is the one case of this power-up being kind of well designed. Dodging the projectiles is actually difficult, and like I said, this is the one case where I don't fully mind using the power-up. This entire level is just oozing with creativity. It feels like the team had so much fun making it. I like the clash between lava and ice found on the Freeze Flame Galaxy, with each star taking turns meshing with these two settings. This could have just been a generic ice or a generic lava level, but playing with these two concepts like this is fun and it makes sense in a space setting. I also love the boss fight against Baron Burr, which is also one of the funniest names of any Mario boss. I love the epic feeling of Battle Rock Galaxy. This is filled with explosions and cannons and which as a kid I remember digging this up. The boss fight against Top Maniac is pretty fun, although the same boss once again repeats later in the game for no good reason. This level is also home to the dumpster star where you have to clear out all the trash in a given time limit. Once again, this totally isn't brought back in the Dreadnought Galaxy. The Dreadnought Galaxy, by the way. Finally, I want to also give a shout out to the Deep Dark Galaxy. There are already two other water levels, but this one is by far the best one. For one thing, this is actually a chilling and creepy stage, which up to this point was kind of a rarity in the Mario franchise. But also, I just really like the platforming in this stage. There are also plenty of miniature levels in the game, which often only feature one star. These were generally neither really good or bad, they just kind of existed. I like the Sweet Sweet Galaxy and Bowie Base. That's the only standouts out of those, to be be honest. I think generally speaking this game has a really strong assortment of levels. Because there are so many versus the more limited amount in 64 and Sunshine, it can lead to some of them not being as memorable as others. However, I still had a lot of fun playing through them, and at the end of the day that is what matters. In order to spice the game up, there are also a set of special missions in most of the levels called Prankster Comets. These add some sort of challenge to one of the previously completed stars in a galaxy. This could be setting a timer that it needs to be completed by, only giving you one life, or making you race against a cosmic version of yourself. Once you actually defeat Bowser, you can also encounter purple coin comets, which require you to collect 100 purple coins in the level. I'll go through my thoughts on each of these prankster comments since my opinions vary greatly between them. First up are the speedy comments, which give you a set timer to complete a level by, hence essentially being a speedrun challenge. Specifically, this prankster comet is found 4 times in the game in the Good Egg Galaxy, Space Junk Galaxy, Dusty Dune Galaxy, and Dreadnought Galaxy. My issue with these is the most straightforward of any of the prankster comments. They are way too generous with the time. Now granted, part of it could be me being experienced with the game and playing it for over a decade, but I think being able to finish these with well over a minute left on the timer is a little much. Any sense of urgency is completely void with all 4 of these examples, essentially making it so it feels like you were just completing the exact same star that you already did all over again. I know it is definitely difficult to determine the proper amount of time to give the player, however they went so overboard on giving the player enough time that it goes from being a challenge to being a monotonous repetition of an already completed mission. Daredevil comets are found in 5 of the galaxies in the game and only allow you 1 life to complete it, mainly being for boss fights. The only exception is the Melty Molten Galaxy, where it is completing a full level. Now the Daredevil comets are by far the best kind of prankster comets in the game, mainly because they are genuinely difficult. The Bouldergeist Daredevil, for example, is regarded as one of the most difficult boss fights in the entire Mario franchise. These comets actually feel like a harder version of their respective missions, which is why I think that they work so well. These are the only prankster comet types that I really don't have too much of an issue to complain about. I think that they all do a good job at establishing a good level of difficulty to keep the task interesting and engaging. Then we got the Cosmic Comets, which just have you race against a cosmic version of Mario, looking akin to Shadow Mario from Super Mario Sunshine. Just like the Speedy Comets, these are way too easy, but they are also much quicker, so I'm not quite as bothered by them. They still suffer from being way too repetitious though, especially since their core concept is the exact same: complete the task as fast as you can. Some of these are even more obnoxious than others, like on the Sea Slide Galaxy. There are already 2 stars that are basically just you swimming in the same direction, with one of them also being a race. Then you have to do a very similar race against Cosmic Mario, hence it becoming monotonous. There are also Fast Foe Comets, which only appear twice in the game, once in Beach Bowl and once in Toy Time. These specific sections are heavily based on avoiding massive objects like thwomps within constricted areas, so honestly this was pretty welcome in my opinion. These were definitely some of the harder missions in the game, and that is what prankster comets should be, so I approve. And finally, like I mentioned, are the purple coin comets, which are divided into 2 categories. First are the ones that have no time limit and take place on a very large area, and I've seen a lot of people online complain about these, and personally I don't really agree. A majority of the purple coins are pretty obvious from a first glance and aren't hard to get, however there will typically be a couple at the end that have you thinking outside the box to find, and I don't know, I found it kind of fun. Specifically, I thought Deep Dark and Freeze Flame did a good job of having coins being well hidden. Now there are 2 exceptions to this that get the bullshit train revving up. Battle Rock and Dreadnought Galaxy are basically a glorified auto-scroller version of the purple coin concept, and these are stupid. I just don't like auto-scrollers in general, so I was already prone to not liking these 2, especially since I don't find either to be that hard. Then we have the timed purple coin stars, which these are my favorite missions in the entire game, also are some of the hardest. Gusty Garden, Ghostly Galaxy, and Toy Time are all some of the most challenging and fun stars in the entire game. Some may disagree and say that Toy Time is too hard, but that's where I say get better at the game. And one of the most important things for these levels fully coming to fruition is the music, and I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about some of my favorite tracks in the game. Super Mario Galaxy has an equally epic and ambitious soundtrack as its gameplay in order to make sure the 2 complement one another. Not that the music in the previous 3D Mario games was bad, far from it, but Super Mario Galaxy has debatably the best soundtrack in any Mario game. Yes, 64 and Sunshine had their own share of bangers, but Galaxy's music just feels dramatic in every case, and some of the songs in this game are just unlike anything else. For a few minutes I wanted to go ahead and walk you through what are some of my my favorite songs in this game personally are. I mentioned earlier that Gusty Garden had a fire song to fit the stage, and yeah, I was not lying. Not only does this song sound epic, but it almost has an emotional side to it. I don't know, it could just be nostalgia speaking, but the way the orchestra in this song swells just gets me. On the other end of the spectrum, the Deep Dark Galaxy has a slow and eerie sound to it. However, it still perfectly matches the water theming within the level. It isn't just a spooky level, as we already had one of those in the game. This is something unique, and the song actually does a pretty good job at representing that from the very beginning with the catchy little piano riff. If you were asking me what I think is the greatest opening song for an introductory stage in a Mario game, my answer is without fail going to be the Good Egg Galaxy. This is the first time you are really embarking on this grand space adventure, and the excitement and epicness is filled to the brim with this level's soundtrack. Right after this level comes the Honey Hive Galaxy, and I genuinely am baffled at how they managed to represent Bee music to sound like. The chill and laid back nature of this song does an incredible job at encapsulating the level. I talked a little bit about the loneliness of the Space Junk Galaxy as a level, however what truly sells this is the music. There is an emptiness to the melody, almost sounding kind of like a lost distress signal being sent throughout space. It isn't only the levels themselves that nail the music too, the bosses are far from being slouches. When fighting Megaleg and the Terrace, the orchestra grows to become intense as you are nothing but an ant compared to this contraption. Although we of course end up defeating it, the music emphasizes how tiny you are compared to it. A little bit later on in the game, we fight Bouldergeist in the Ghostly Galaxy, which is one of the most well-designed bosses in the entire Mario series. Specifically, the Daredevil run for the star is not even close to being easy, even whenever you have a lot of practice with it. The music does a pretty good job at keeping you locked into the fight too, with its intense yet spooky atmosphere. Also, I want to bring up the boss fights against Camilla because it may just be me, but it feels like the music is almost laughing at you while fighting her. She is one of the most personality-driven bosses in the game, and that sense being delivered through the music helps to show that off. Finally, I want to talk about 3 final songs, since above everything else I've talked about so far, they kind of do a particularly good job at their specific goals. First is the song that plays in the library whenever we listen to Rosalina tell her story. The delivery of the story is both somber and emotional, and the music is just, well, listen to it. It sounds both heavenly and extremely sad at the exact same time, a sense of melancholy that is not easy to properly emulate. At the end of the game, you could assume the music for the final level to be incredible, and you would not be wrong. The final level is literally called the Fate of the Universe, which really drills in what all is at stake. In Super Mario 64, it was about saving Peach, and this game is literally about the entire universe that the Peach's castle takes place in. And as soon as you load into Bowser's Galaxy Reactor, those stakes become incredibly apparent. And once we actually get to our final fight against Bowser, we get one of the most incredible final boss themes in gaming history. This isn't the only Mario game with a final fight theme that rips into your veins like this, but the second you hear it, you feel like a total badass knowing that you are saving the entire universe. So this is a type of video that I had made twice before, and I think that my opinions changed in both of those previous deeper looks. However, neither of those times did I really stop and take a critical look at the game, make an effort to take my nostalgia goggles off and think about what I really thought about the game. It's easy to say with any game or piece of media that you grew up with that it's objectively better than that of any other time period, so I really wanted to make sure that I didn't let that happen with this video. And that isn't to say that this game isn't deserving of the perception it often gets online. It absolutely is a marvel of gaming and one of the most unique games in the entire Mario series. Nintendo went through a time period in the early 2010s where they basically made the same game over and over. This carried over both the 2D and 3D games, and we didn't really see a change of the formula up until the Switch era began with games like Super Mario Odyssey. Super Mario Galaxy was to many people the last ounce of originality with the Mario franchise for the better part of a decade. And I also mentioned in my Sunshine video, another shameless plug, that the game sticking to a beach and vacation setting meant the team needed to be more creative when designing each of those levels. This is kind of the case with Galaxy, but not really at the same time. While they needed to design each level to fit in the general space theme, they had a lot more leeway in the settings that they chose. Basically anything made sense because it's a planet in its own galaxy, who gives a f. With that being said, the much larger amount of variety in the levels works in both ways for this game. I feel like with everything that has been said in this game, it really is easy to overanalyze this game and miss the beauty that is present. A critique of this game could be that it's easy in comparison to the previous two entries. A critique could also be that the game's linear nature takes away part of the player discovering nuance from Sunshine and 64. Now those opinions are far from invalid. There is definitely a part of the openness of the first two games that was magical, not being brought back until Odyssey in 2017. Obviously that goes down to personal taste, and many felt that the openness was a good separator between what was expected in the 2D and 3D Mario games. However, I think Galaxy kind of proved that it didn't necessarily have to be that way. The fact that I vividly remember times being at a friend's hangout where everyone fought over who got to play this game meant that obviously something worked. You know something worked whenever you see countless people rave about how incredible of a game this is. Yes, this is a different 3D Mario game than the previous two, but sometimes change is good. And by sometimes, I mean a lot of the time change is good. Once again, I want to hone in that there is nothing wrong with the format present on 64, Sunshine, and Odyssey. I love that style of gameplay. I am just fighting on the side of Galaxy right here, and maybe it's nostalgia speaking subliminally despite me trying to avoid that, but the game sticks the landing. From the gameplay element to the music element to the artistic design element, there are just so few flaws about this game that I can point out. In fact, I remember at the beginning of the recording process for this game, I had just played through Sunshine and this felt like a massive breath of fresh air. Sunshine is a fun game, but let's just say calling the game clunky is an understatement. The camera and controls felt awkward and just bizarre at many points. The jump to Galaxy right after, despite the countless number of times that I played this game, just jumped out with the massive contrast in gameplay style. Galaxy is smooth and polished, every part of the game just feels like it was developed with excruciating detail. And the times where the controls didn't feel completely ideal were much less intrusive on the overall experience. This was such an ambitious game that I don't ever really get frustrated whenever that kind of thing happens. I know this could easily lead to me yapping over and over about how much I love this game, and I really don't want that to happen. All I will really say now to close out my thoughts on the game is that for how frustrated I get over the Wii's motion controls, this is one of the very few exceptions to the rule. I think this is another reason why this game has fostered so much critical acclaim online too. This genuinely felt like Nintendo being creative with the Mario franchise, and just like I said earlier in the video, that is something that became void for years after this release. This is a video that I have already made 2 times, and I feel like now on my 3rd attempt, I have finally done the best I can at articulating my thoughts. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and as always, peace out.